All right. Welcome to season 3 of Mommy Mondays. It's been a minute, but we are back, and I'm really excited because we're going to kick off season 3 with a really, really special guest. She's a mother and she's an author, and she's just an incredible woman that defines strength and trusting your intuition is what I love. That she's so big on. So please, I just want to introduce Yasmin Teresa Garcia Bay to Mommy Mondays. She is here to share her story in motherhood and just her journey in motherhood and the highs and lows that she's had to experience. We all have a story, and Mommy Mondays is so focused on making sure that everybody's story is heard. Um, some, are similar and some are not, but we all have a story to tell. And it's important, especially with Yasmin Teresa Garcia Bay's story, is that it's one of I want to say, um, a test within self, because I think all these journeys are big tests within selves. And I think what I admire the most about learning about your story is just your resilience in through everything that you've been going through and still finding a way to just like just share so much love and experience to your audience with your journey. So that's all I'm gonna say. I want you to really tell your story. So let's just start off with who you are, where you from, where you grew up at, and all that good stuff. Let us know what you about.
Well, greetings. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Much success to you with this podcast.
Thank you.
So I'm Yasmin Teresa Garcia Bay, also known as Y the G on social media. That's short for Yasmin Teresa Garcia Bay. I am originally from Brooklyn, New York, first generation Taino Arawak, indigenous people of the Caribbean islands. And I am a mother, a daughter, a grandmother. I am the one chosen to continue the legacy of my people. I am a minister of life. By way of my ancestral calling, I have been serving our community since the age of 13 as a natural birth keeper, an educator, now an herbalist, and just a keeper of sacred traditions.
I love that. Was this something you grew up in, or is it something that you've had to just kind of tap into yourself as you grew within yourself?
I have always known, and a lot of people ask me that, like, how did you know that you were an intuitive? How did you know that you were supposed to serve from this place of, keeping your traditions and your culture alive? And there was always something in me as a child. One, I've always been a talker. I've always been kind of like the funny one, the one that got things done, that initiated something different. And I grew up in an environment in which, and I keep realizing this now, that like everybody in my family were very strong, like strong headed. We're very like willful people. We're willing to speak our mind and take initiative and take action in anything. Like there's nobody in my family, especially my immediate family, that is quiet. So there's nobody in my family that won't stay shut, or like everybody has like this warrior spirit, even if it's not a healthy or
Yeah.
wealthy, a healthy intention behind it. But
Yeah.
everybody is just like so strong-willed and strong-headed, and they're gonna speak their mind. They're gonna do something. They're gonna, hustle. Or so this is the environment that I come from. And although it wasn't always healthy or balanced, it was often dysfunctional and misdirected energy.
Yes.
I always knew that there was something in me that like reminded me, like, trust your voice, trust your strength, trust that you are, guiding yourself, essentially, because I'm the youngest of three girls.
Wow.
So, and I grew up in a two-parent household, but I grew up code switching because we're from the Caribbean, but then grew up in New York. Every summer we went to the island of Haiti, which is where I'm from. I'm Haitian and Dominican. Again, Taino Arawak. And so we had to learn early on to code switch to survive in the world of America, but then still know who we are as Indigenous people. And it was often very conflicting because our parents wanted us to live a certain way, but my intuition and my spirit guides, which were, now that I know, my ancestors, my grandmother, my grandfather, my great grandparents, were always around me. They would show up and always exposing me to different things, to even our language, our cultures. So for me, it's my purpose as a minister of life, my purpose as a mother has always shown up. And it started when I was in middle school, becoming a birth worker, becoming what they call a doula. We just don't say that. We don't use that Greek word because we're not
Yeah.
Greek. So I was a birth worker at 13 in middle school when two of my friends got pregnant. One of them was 16, one of them was 13 or 14. And this was eighth grade. And I grew up in the hood, so it wasn't uncommon. But looking back, it's like, yo, that's ratchet. Like that's kind of like unhealthy. Like, what is going on here?
Yes, I've seen the same. Yep.
Yeah, so I was exposed to that, and I initially like sprung into action when these close friends of mine became pregnant, and they came to class with the sad eyes, the I have an appointment, I have to do this, and I'm like, and nobody's helping you and nobody's supporting you. Like, you're becoming a mom. This is a big deal. So I sprung into this. Let me Google and research resources and what's really happening to their body and their mental states, and how can I be a good friend to them and support them, because they're coming into English class having to deal with, our teachers, and dealing with a whole set of, experiences that was beyond grasp as young teenagers, as babies, basically.
That's
So,
amazing that you were able to tap into that because I feel like I didn't have that. I had my friends, obviously, who, got pregnant at 15, 16. One of them, I went with her to have, like, she went to have an abortion. I went with her. And then the other ones, like, everybody gave birth between 16 and 19 years old. And I was in a whole nother space. Like, I didn't have my first child till I was 34. It was at 34, 36, 38, and 42.
wow.
So I'm literally like the last of my little crew. It's like one other one. Me and her had babies in our 30s. But yeah, I afterwards when I gave birth, I literally apologized to all my friends because I was like, yo, I don't feel like I was like there for you. I don't feel like I was a good friend. Like I had no
Mm.
what you were even battling. And I'm here going through it in my 30s and I'm looking at you at 16, 17. This is what you were going through. And one of them didn't have any support. Her mom kicked her out. You know how it was back in the days. It was like, we ain't about that. You know what I mean? Um, so it was just, I felt so guilty. I remember afterwards, like, I cannot believe I was not like there for you. Like, I should have been a better friend. They're like, no, you didn't know. Like, I was here in the clubs, partying, acting a fool. They're like legit at home being full-time mothers. And they was just like, when I look back, I was like, wow, that was deep and that was some real stuff you had to do. So the fact that you even just had that in you, that's incredible. Like
Mhm.
that just goes to show just how deep rooted that gift is that you learned it from such
Yeah.
a young age. I love that.
Well, I
Yeah.
will share though, like the important thing to notice too, that just naturally as human beings and as spiritual beings having a human experience, we're going to show up where there is lack. Or if we allow our spirit to lead, we're going to fill the gaps. And one of the things that I noticed is that I was very nurturing, not just because I'm a life path number 6, not just because I'm a Libra, not just because my grandmother said she's the one that's gonna do it. But I didn't have a mother that was emotionally present. I had a mother in what we call today a very narcissistic, individual. And so because of her own upbringing, because of her own experience with abandonment and, parental neglect
Mm.
and spiritual dissolution, uh, I had to show up for myself. Being the youngest of 3, it was kind of like she's taken care of by the other 2. So I was the child that had to kind of fend for herself a lot and figure things out. So when I was like in middle school and coming into my body, coming into my own autonomy, I noticed that there wasn't enough women supporting women or mothers nurturing their children, their daughters. my first impression of becoming a young girl, getting my period was like, I called my mom. I'm at the house. She's not even there. She's working. But we were latchkey kids, of course. We had a mom who, when I was coming up, my two sisters had her semi present, but then when I was coming up, she was gone. She was in school. She was getting masters. She was working. So my mom is absent. My dad is home by 3, 4 o'clock. But I'm like, hey, mom, I just got my period. And she's like, okay, well, tell your father to go to the store and get you some pads. Cool. So that was, and thankfully, I had a father who was, affectionate and caring. So he wasn't weird about stuff like that. He's very, he's nurturing compared to my mom, but still, two very masculine and aggressive people are only going to raise very strong-headed women, right? So that was my introduction to womanhood, the lack of support from the mothers, the elders. And I felt like I've always had to step in that role for myself and then for people around me, especially women and children.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's really amazing. So when you know, as far as in motherhood, was this something that was, because of, what you were just explaining, was this something that you were very like eager to experience? Like, you know what, I can't wait till I can have my children so I can
Mhm.
do something different than my mother did. I know I felt the same way because I had the same
Mhm.
experience.
Wow. Yeah, that was exactly what my intention was. I feel sometimes as though, and more so now because of so much I experienced in my own initiation to motherhood, because my initiation was one through fire. Everybody has a different experience, but my initiation was through fire. It was really to get me to this new level of spirituality and awareness, and also knowing of who I am. And I just always had this, I felt like it was why I was born, to nurture or to show, because I'm the last of three girls. I was actually intended to be a boy. Like my parents were just trying to get a boy. So when I came, very independent and very like, I'm gonna figure it out. She's the trendsetter, the one that does things differently. I realized like, okay, well, y'all need laughter, y'all need nurturing, y'all need love, but then also y'all need discipline and focus. And I realized as I am older, I see how my characteristics and my personality traits was born into my family to kind of create balance. I'm a Libra. So I always wanted to be a mother because I felt like I had so much love to give and I couldn't keep it inside. And I don't know if that's
Oh,
because I'm the youngest and didn't experience like giving to like a younger sibling, but always I even recall like having dreams of my own son now that I know who he is. Particularly in high school, I had a dream of he came to me and he was playing with a basketball and he's like, mommy, look at me, look at me. And he's like showing me, he's like a toddler in the dream. So when I had my twins and then I lost my daughter and ended up with my son, I was like, was this always meant to be that it would just, part of my journey was him? So for me, it's always been a desire. I definitely never intended to be a single mother first. I never intended to not have a healthy, you know, um, pregnancy experience, especially being one who always helps others have a healthy, harmonious experience. So it's been a whirlwind, but it's definitely always been something I wanted.
Wow, amazing. Funny how the things go full circle, how you, like you said, you grew up knowing intuitively that you wanted something. And it's not like you had to fight, you just were, like you were just being, and things were unfolding for you in that way. And that was really beautiful. It's interesting. Because I never wanted, like I believed, I think I made myself believe that I didn't want children because of my fear. But once I ended up pregnant and I like decided, okay, wow, this is happening. And like we decided, like, I mean, like, the baby, our spirits, our soul contracts were being unfolded. I'm like, oh wow, like we're really doing this. It's like what you were saying, it was something you realized that you were born to do. Like, oh, this is my mission here. Oh, it solidifies. And that's amazing that you just knew always.
I
Yes.
do I do want to mention too, because I feel like a lot of people, because I feel like a lot of people think, or they, we're raised in this society particularly to believe that just because you're a woman, you're supposed to want to be a mom and stuff like that. Now, as an, as an older adult, I mean, I'm 33 years old, but still, I've always been a little bit ahead of my time. I've always been like the older minded person in the group most of the time. So I've always noticed that people felt this pressure, women felt this pressure of like, should I want to be a mom just because I'm getting older, et cetera, et cetera. And the more I've learned about myself, again, through astrology, numerology, Chinese astrology, just having moments to myself, I studied who I am because of the time I was born, because of the place I was born, and knowing that we all are created as individuals to create balance in this earth. And particularly me, as a life path number 6, we are born to be nurturers in this world at this time. We're born to be good teachers, good mentors, good guides. We have patience. We're good communicators. We're also social and funny. That lends to a great mother who can be patient and also teach you versus impatient and or impatient and very controlling. So a lot of people feel the pressure to need to do something, but I want to say to your viewers and your listeners is that not everybody is called to do the same thing. So there's so much importance that needs to be highlighted in who you are and your characteristic and personality in this world that's at this time. Because not everybody is called to be a mother. You might be called to be an amazing aunt or an amazing teacher, but being a mother might not be in the cards for you just because that's not, you weren't given the tools to be that. And babies are karmic, right? So babies all come to teach us the lesson. They all come for a specific reason. And I've noticed that certain children come into our lives because we have not completed or will not complete a mission. So they're coming to finish something that we didn't finish.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So getting into motherhood, tell us about your first motherhood journey. Was it a planned pregnancy? What was the relationship between you and your partner? And just tell us how everything transpired after that.
So I would love to clear the air in a very public domain because this is something that has to be shared. I was never in a relationship with my child's father, but he has lied about this to his friends and family and his community. I do have facts and proof of this, chisme, this gossip. So it's weird to me because as somebody who tends to be very honest and upfront, and I'm not hiding shit about my story, I would never want to create a narrative that wasn't true. And so I knew my child's father when I was 21 years old, working at AT&T in California. I was going to school, I was working, I was living on my own, just kind of really learning how to navigate young adulthood by myself across the country from everybody that I ever known. And I was just living life, not recklessly, to be honest, but just trying to figure out what my next step was, how I could be more authentic in me, but I was still just focused on working, paying bills, figuring out having my first apartment. And so I meet this gentleman who's like I think he's 8 or 9 years older than me. He's a security guard at the job. I'm a sales rep. We really connect in a time and space where I'm just kind of like really low vibrational. I'm just kind of like a little lost in life because everything that I believe in, I can't seem to get in alignment with. I'm still struggling and surviving versus being authentic and thriving, right? So we connected on just like basketball and fitness, and he ended up being kind of just like a calm, smooth, charismatic type energy, which I ignored red flags because people at the job didn't really like him. But I've always been the nurturer who made excuses for people's bad behavior because I felt bad. Like, why wouldn't you like him? There's nothing wrong, whatever. Like, we should all give him a chance. So we ended up going out on 3 dates, one of them being hiking, basketball, and like an all-white party. That was it. After that, he didn't even work there consistently. So it was kind of like we communicated via text or whatever. He followed me through social media. And after he left the job and I left the job, and which all was in a matter of like 6 months, to be honest, I ended up moving back east. We lost connection, but he continued to basically stalk me on social media. But I didn't know this, okay? But within 5, 6, 7, like it was about 5 or 6 years, he was consistent with just only reaching out to me on my birthday and saying happy birthday on Facebook. And so I just never saw anything wrong with it. I just thought it was kind of charming or endearing that he still remembered me or that he still had feelings for me. So it had been almost 3 years that I was dating somebody who I thought I was going to marry, who I had a relationship or situationship with. I thought I'd grown up a lot more. I was now 27, 28. But it wasn't going anywhere with this man because now that I know, he was kind of still hung up on his ex. And so in that time in between where I was just like, so I'm not going to live the rest of my life with you. Now I'm heartbroken. And I'm also still in the midst of working more towards being a birth worker. At this time, I just started working professionally as a birth worker. I've traveled to Ghana in West Africa to learn midwifery and just learning more about myself as an individual and connecting back with my own roots and my culture. I then experienced the death of my grandmother. Then I experienced the breakup with this guy. And then my child's father steps into the picture again. He's now contacting me again through social media and being a little bit more abrasive in the sense of like, we should really, you should move out here with me. I'll get us a house. I don't love bombing is what they call it. Love bombing. And I was in such a place where I felt so, what's the word? It's not abandoned. I guess
Vulnerable?
Huh?
Vulnerable, maybe?
I was very vulnerable, but I also felt as though like, like thrown away, like, yeah, like discarded and like I wasn't chosen. So to see my child's father, at the time, he wasn't my child's father, but he then started to approach me again with his charismatic ways. And I started to think to myself, well, there's not necessarily too much red flags. He wasn't rude to me. He was charismatic. I remember visiting his home once after the hiking trail because it was by his house. And I remember meeting his son very briefly. But then I do remember he was very cold with his son. His son was very sheltered. And now looking back now, I see a lot of reasons why, or who this man really was. And that was one of my mistakes. And I wish people never ignore how men or women treat their children, especially when they have significant others, even if it's for one moment. It still matters how a person talks or how the child addresses the parent. Because if the child is not super confident, comfortable, and affectionate towards the parent, that's a red flag. Okay. But I was in my own world, in my own mind of survival. But at that time, I didn't think about any of those things. I just thought I had just broken up. This guy's approaching me. He invites me on a trip. The first guy to ever invite me to fly me out somewhere. And it was just to Atlanta, Georgia. He was coming from California. I was in New York. He's contacting me through social media. And now we're connecting via text. Maybe once in a while, we're calling each other. And he's like, come, I'll fly you out. Girl, it was Spirit. So let's not be impressed either by cheap ass but yeah, and me not really knowing how to take anything from a man, like money and stuff like that. I was not raised like that. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's kind. And so to be honest, I went on the trip with him. I said, I'm not sleeping with him. I'm not getting too involved. I'm just seeing where this goes. I've never visited Georgia, Atlanta, so whatever. But the day after we landed and I had met just some of his distant family and girls, he was like showing off like, oh, I'm going to go visit a property that I own over there. It was not that serious. It was a lot of like showing off, showboating. And I was just so young and dumb and like impressed by the smallest things that I would never do that again. But as a nurturer, as somebody who made excuses for caring for people, even if they were gaslighting me, I had to learn that the hard way. Um, so yeah, I felt bad for him the night we slept together. I felt bad. I felt, well, he flew me out. And now I know, as a 33-year-old and speaking to some elders, I know that this is something that women tend to do a lot, where they would sleep with somebody just because they feel they owe them something in return. And that was my mistake, and that is how I conceived my twins. Now, here's the thing: as an herbalist, as somebody who was consuming natural birth control for 3 years and never got pregnant, um, I stopped taking it because I was single. I had broken up with my ex, and I had stopped ovulating. Like, I was done with my ovulation cycle, or so I thought.
Wow.
And
Wow.
then my twins were conceived that night, in which I felt bad for a man and slept with him. And again, not really one to, just do things without protection of all kinds. But yeah, so I knew, in a sense, he was healthy, I was healthy, but yeah, biggest mistake, but greatest blessing or lesson that was learned from that. And after that, I broke it off with him the moment I got back home, the day later. And I felt
Mhm.
something was off. I also felt like me and him weren't in alignment. We weren't spiritually there. And I literally had that aha moment of like, wow, this is why the universe said this never worked in the past. Right. So it started all to kind of make sense. And then I broke it off with him over the phone. And his reaction was very aggressive, was very negative. And after that, I was like, yeah, this is the right thing. Like, hey, even for him to feel rejected, that's the word, rejected, and to react so immaturely like that, or abusive, I was like, okay, well, I did the right thing. 3 weeks later, I never missed a period in my life, and all of a sudden I'm late. And I did the most responsible and honest thing I believe every woman should do, or at least I don't know if I regret it now, but I called him after I took a test from the Dollar Tree, knowing my body. I was like, I know something's off, and something is with me. Someone is with me. And so
Wow.
I called him and I was like, listen, I'm pregnant and I don't need to take more tests after this one, because I know I'm pregnant. And he just, like, again, love bombed me. He was like, well, this is great. Well, I love you. You can come live with me. And again, red flags. And I'm just like, dude, this is a lot, but we don't really know each other. We haven't spoken in like 5 years. We just reconnected for a few months while I'm like in this vulnerable state. You lured me into a trip. I felt bad and slept with you, of course, being a bendeja and doing something like that. And yeah, but I knew I had to take the responsibility of like, well, I've always wanted children. So clearly there's a purpose here in all of this, because I don't believe in abortion. I believe in releasing of the spirit, in the sense of like, I would never go into an institution and let people poke and prod my body and try to aid in some kind of murder. But I will sit with the spirit and sit with nature. And if I have to, if it's not God's will, then it won't happen. And that's exactly what happened. It wasn't God's will for me to release these babies in my way or my term, or etc. So I said, I've always wanted my children, period. So I took care of myself. I took care of the situation. I did everything that I could to be responsible with all the knowledge and wisdom that I had, and trusting my own, intuition. And he, throughout the whole pregnancy, he just wanted me to be with him. And I was like, we don't even know each other like that. We were getting to know each other again after so much years. We're different people now. But apparently to him, he thought he knew me. He's kept track of me through social media. But I did my best to be a co-parent and to make it very clear that I had boundaries from the beginning. I was like, we can be really good friends so that we can raise our child, because I didn't know they were twins yet. And he was just really against that. He wanted me to be with him. And as much as I tried to include him and just let's keep it about being parents right now, he was so invested in coming all the way from California to New York to take me out on a date, not to go to a doctor's visit with me, or excuse me, a midwifery appointment with me. He was so invested in taking me out to see an NBA game. And it's just like, yeah, this is not about the children for you. So a lot of that was concerning to me. And then when I started to show him who I was and how, you know, I live my life, I'm very autonomous on paper and in spirit, then you have to kind of compromise with me, because nobody coming through my body is going to be injected into a system in which we have no control over, right? We have to be responsible for the vessels that we bring into this world. And that was my duty and my perspective on that. And he was against it from the beginning. So there was a lot of conflict, a lot of argumenting from his side. And I was trying to preserve my peace the whole time. So it was tough.
Wow. So did you ever move to California? Or you stayed in New York?
No, I stayed in New York and then ended up moving by 6 months. I knew I wasn't going to give birth in New York. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't know any people that I trusted in midwives or a team. So I also never felt safe in New York because I grew up there and it has always been chaotic, loud, and dysfunctional and just very disturbing as an energy vortex. So we ended up moving, me, my sister, and my brother-in-law actually ended up moving and renting a house in Delaware, which is 2 hours from New York. And that's where I ended up giving birth to my children. I gave birth at home. And after I gave birth, my son was born first, my daughter was born next, and she was born with a slight, like a little portion of her lung was collapsed. And so she needed assistance in breathing. And so when we immediately contacted, at least this is from what I know of the story, because I was semi there, semi out of consciousness. When we contacted EMS, their role and responsibility was just to administer oxygen and ensure that mother and baby stayed together. But in fact, they separated both of us. They took the baby to a children's hospital. I ended up bleeding out and hemorrhaging because I was separated from the babies, which is statistically something that often happens when you separate a mother and a child. And then we were taken to two separate hospitals. So I was in one hospital fighting for my life. I had no idea what was happening to my children or where they were. And that's when I in the brink of death, which they had to revive me in the hospital through 8 blood transfusions. I had that was my spiritual fire initiation of like, I sat there with my ancestors and we had a conference and I was like, you guys can't take me from my children. I don't know this man. I created these babies and I can't leave them with a man that I don't even know. And I do not feel safe with him already throughout this whole pregnancy, since we had been in conflict and he was never willing to compromise in any of my beliefs. And my grandmother, being a woman, a traditional medicine woman who was known for being the cleaning lady in a hospital in DR, she was often called into the operating room and was told by the doctor, who is my godfather, she was told by him to lay her hands on the person in the operating table to stop them from hemorrhaging. And with her prayers and her spiritual gifts, that's what she would do. Yeah. And these are the people that I come from. And then I end up hemorrhaging when I give birth to my twins. And that's who saved me. That's my belief. That's who saved me. It wasn't just the hospital people. I wasn't alone in there. I was being probed and prodded by students, by an attending overlooking the students who stood at the corner of the room, and I can see him slightly while I was fighting for my life. But it was my grandmother, my great-grandfather who showed up, who were the medicine men and women in my family, who were known in the community for saving women and children in instances like this. So yeah, my story is crazy, is one of resilience and just choosing to live for my children.
Wow. So what was he there when you gave birth?
No, he wasn't there. It was a decision that I made in the middle of my pregnancy, where there was so much conflict in our conversation and no compromise that I really like physically would get ill when I would speak to him on the phone. And knowing how it's important for a woman to preserve her peace and because I was carrying twins and knew so okay, I studied midwifery with the farm midwives of Summertown, Tennessee. Okay, so the Ina Mae Gaskins, the Pamela Hunt, I studied midwifery with them alongside with a lot of the traditional teachings of my people. And knowing how important it was for pregnant women with twins to keep a specific diet to ensure that there's no inflammation in the extremities, etc. I was an A+ student when it came to my health, right? So, and I was intentional about that. So when I would speak to him and I would see that I would get so like just really panicky, I would even have nightmares. And I was like, if this man is around when I give birth, it would be a matter of life and death for me, which is funny because it still happened. But that was one of the things that I feared more so because of who he was and his spirit. There was something really off. And now, cut to 2024 present day, kidnapping our son with no remorse, telling people in a court of law that our child is not suffering because of what he did. There's a lot of ignorance and a lot of dismissing of mental health, of how this impacts both my health and our child's health. It's really evident that he's not mentally there or aware of the harm that he's causing. So the best choice that I ever made was to tell him, hey, I don't feel safe with you being there. You can be in the state, you can be in the city, you can have a hotel room an hour away or 5 minutes away. I don't care. But for you to be in the room or in the home with me when this happens, I will not feel safe. And I've walked and assisted women in the brink of life and death, which is childbirth. That's the experience. I've sat there with women. I've had to hold their hands and hold space as we walk through the veil of life and death, because a midwife doesn't do that. A midwife has to be in the reality present of the protocol, of the medical protocol in which she keeps everyone safe and healthy. A birth worker, also known as a doula, has to walk through the spiritual journey with a mother. So I made that decision in those instances where it led up to him just constantly abusing me over the phone, verbally abusing me, being passive aggressive, being confrontational and non-compromisable. That's when I knew if he was in that was going to really, I just knew emotional dystocia was going to be my prognosis in the beginning.
That's a lot of respect to that, because I think sometimes women will just, a lot of people will be like, oh, but it's still the father, you know what I mean? And then still be like, oh, they'll feel bad. And the fact that you took control of that, I respect that a lot, because, one thing that was so important when I made a decision about giving birth at home was who was going to be in that room. And unfortunately, one of those people that I did not want in that room was my mother. Because
happens too much.
It was just the, I learned a lot about myself. I went through a healing journey of learning that she was, aside from, other forms of abuse, she was very emotionally abusive. I never even knew that existed until, I started to learn it. And I was like, oh, that's what that is that she does. That's why she takes me like spinning on this roller coaster and I lose it. And she takes me always off course. And I just felt that was a moment that I couldn't afford to have that energy. I had to take control. And I know some people obviously felt, a certain way about that decision, but I was very adamant about, well, it doesn't really matter how anybody else feels. It's about what
it makes a difference. And I want to highlight this because in my line of work, part of my work, I'm very intentional of training and preparing the men to be the best support person in the room. In fact, to be the most important support person in the room. My job as a birth worker has always been, I'm going to ensure that you and your husband or you and your partner are connected spiritually, mentally, and physically, being affectionate with each other in childbirth. So my story is a little bit different because I did not know my child's father. This was a man that I had reconnected with after I lose count, but I think it's between 5 or 7 years that we lost touch. And then you know how much you change and grow in lives I lived within all that, almost married a whole nother man, like, you know. So it's important for people to recognize, like, my decision was solely based on a very specific circumstance in which I naturally would always have a man be the most important person in the room when a child is being born, you know, the father being
Right.
the most important, because that's who created it. Not me, the doula, the birth worker. I'm not the one that created the baby, so I would never take a man's role or the partner's role. But my situation was very circumstantial, so it's not to be compared with others.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Can you now just kind of, you mentioned that your baby was kidnapped. So can you tell us about how that transpired and where that's at this point with your child?
Yeah, so the kidnapping, it does have to be said that my babies were twins. So when my babies were separated and I was fighting for my life in another hospital, not being able to speak or advocate for my children how I wished I would have, decisions were made against my will, in which I had proxies, I had advocates call, communicate with nurses and doctors of where my children were. I had them fax over documentation that I was not someone who was infected with HIV/AIDS. I did not need any, or the babies did not need any hepatitis B vaccine. And I was saying that there was no consent given by any parent. And so until we are there, nothing should be done to my children. Letters, again, notices were faxed, and even medical records from my midwife was faxed. Within an hour or two, I also spoke. When I had regained consciousness, I had spoken to a nurse and a doctor, verbally letting them know that that was not something I was consenting to until I was there present. 4 hours later, or actually after that conversation, hepatitis B and vitamin K was still administered to both of my children. And my son was completely healthy. He was just being kept there over observation because I was in another hospital and because they were born at home. I have to highlight that this was literally the first or second week that COVID hit. So everything was a hot mess in the world. Everybody was going rogue because nothing was being monitored in a sense. Okay. So while my son was there for 24 hours observation, they injected or inoculated both my children with this, vaccine. And within 4 hours, according to medical records, my daughter's health was plummeting. She was going into seizures. She was completely, getting inflamed. So they basically administered her hepatitis B, in which the CDC says no one, not a baby, not an elderly, not anybody should ever be administered hepatitis B vaccine if they have any respiratory issues. And if she came in with a bit of a collapsed lung and needed assistance in, breathing and anything, all she needed was the breathing, perhaps breast milk administered to help reduce any effects of sepsis, etc. Again, all things I've researched and realized what things that could have been done differently. They still did that without my consent within the 4 hours, which is within the time frame of a potential lawsuit proof. They, they basically killed her brain. And so by the time I saw her, when I got out 3 days later, and I was able to walk again, I went to see her and she was basically brain dead, or nobody's really brain dead according to scientists, but that's what they said. So that's what they welcomed me with and gave me the options of, you could either decide to leave her here for her organs, or you can take her home and she'll be tube fed for the rest of her life, a vegetable basically. Which a lot of what they said was fear mongering. A lot of what they said was not true. They said she couldn't breathe on her own, was not true, because through guidance, every day when I would go see her, I had to advocate for them to take her off the breathing machine and then when they literally prepared us for her death, there she was breathing. There she was breathing alone without this machine. After they said she was going to die within seconds, she was still there within hours. And this was a situation in which I was visiting the hospital every day during COVID. And I was basically only allowed, not allowed, but I was only able to like see her for an hour or two because I was breastfeeding and had to leave my sister and my son in the car because they were not allowed up with me because of COVID. It was only one person that could come into the hospital at a time. So it was like, so do I go stay? I couldn't even bring my infant son. Like it was just so crazy and just, so all of this, my child's father is in the other side of the country and I'm communicating as much as I can, as best as I can, while I'm still bleeding my guts out, while I'm still really not consciously mentally there, but still doing the best to research, to make the best decisions for me and my babies. Considering him, you know, even though I had such a a dysfunctional, relationship with him, I was still video chatting with him. And meanwhile, now that I know, he was on behind my back, getting advice from people and saying that I did this and saying that I'm murdering our child and just blaming me for all of this. Yet he had no idea a lot of what the experience I had been experiencing, the racism, the disrespect, the inability to even, have both my children together because of COVID, which is naturally something that you're supposed to do with twins. They actually help each other. They're not supposed to be separated. So it was really hard. And so that's where things just started to go really bad. My child's father tried to say that I didn't involve him in anything or that I made all these decisions on my own, but yet he never took a flight. He never came and said, I'm at the hospital. He knew exactly what hospital I was in or the babies were in. Everything he did was from a phone. And I'm like, okay, but I'm the one in the trenches here. I could only do so much communicating everything to you when you're the worst communicator I've ever experienced in my life. And you're just confrontational and blaming me for everything. Keep your emotions to the side. Let's figure out what's happening to our children. And so, again, he never showed up for anything. He was still too busy in the other side of the country and trying to call shots from a phone. And then after a while, I didn't hear from him. Oh, I actually had to block him because he was just, every conversation was just, you're a murderer, you're a murderer, you're a murderer. While I'm dealing with pediatricians, trying to find a safe doctor for my child, because then they were trying to push this idea that he needs to see a specialist because he was breech, and all he needed was a chiropractor and a good, and that's what I ended up finding, a chiropractor from day one, an MD, a holistic MD, who was an amazing doctor for my son for the first year and a half, 2 years. And the 3 or 4 months after, where I had to block him because he was just abusing me over the phone, I had to make decisions about my daughter's life and her end of life care. They wanted me to either let her die in the hospital or choose to bring her home, because that was my options. That's what they said, that she would never recover, that she would never come back from this, all because of one thing that they kept avoiding that they did. Oh, these things happened because she was born at home. And I'm like, yeah, but all she needed was oxygen. And I've seen children come back from worse. And I'm in this field, and everybody I know has seen children come back from worse. And you're saying that just because my daughter needed oxygen and then was inoculated and went into seizures out of nowhere, now all of a sudden I have to bring her home on, what's that thing called? When people die at home. I forgot what it's called. But anyways, yeah.
Hospice.
So hospice. Thank
Hospice
you.
care, yeah.
Yeah, so I had to bring her home in hospice. Again, I told him this was happening. He never showed up. He just kept arguing with me over the phone. So you're not here to create a solution. You're not here to show your face and help me with the situation. You're just here, victim blaming. And they said she would die within days. She died within 36 days. She died in the bed with me and my son. Never left our side. I didn't leave the house not one time while she was home, obviously, because she was just in her cot and she was just always with us and just barely there, barely, not really there. And after that, a few months later, where I had to disconnect, like block the father because he was just being verbally abusive, I get papers in the mail that he's trying to get custody or visitation for my son. So this was 6 months after I gave birth, and grieving or barely grieving and I'm still dealing with everybody. I'm dealing with detectives. I'm dealing with CPS. I'm dealing with figuring out who I'm gonna sue, because what the hell did y'all do to my daughter? I'm going back through all my medical records and making sure I did everything right, which I did. Not one finger was ever inflamed in my body, not, just being super precautious, because that's my line of work. That's just who I am. And he just decided to go behind my back and file for custody. And then what happened of my son being legally kidnapped was that we were going through the custody situation for about a few months or maybe a year. I had people assisting me who were pretending to be jurists. They were filing paperwork and signing paperwork with my name, saying it was me, but being paperwork that was unprofessional, really ignorant, doing copy and paste of things. One document that was filed under my name for my custody of my children and just proving autonomy of my children and who they were, had information about a parking ticket. So just like the paperwork that were being filed were just, and I didn't have the capacity to become a lawyer at the time or become a jurist or be super knowledgeable about a system that I've never been in. Nobody in my family had ever dealt with custody. So I don't come from that. I come from a 2-parent household, not shared time, it was very new to me. So I had to kind of just either be nurturing and be a mother, or now become this warrior, student of law, and figure out how to defend myself and my children or my child. And because they did what they did, they also made it seem as though the case was closed. I believed them. The letter stopped coming to the house. Behind my back, the court had made a decision and granted him full custody. I didn't receive that letter. I ended up being evicted from that house because now at that time, it was just me living there by myself with my now 1.5-year-old. My sister and her husband moved out, left the country because they now were pregnant and had to, go through their own experience, and decided to do it out of this country. So now I was just figuring out what was my next move by myself without the help of the father. Never got a letter. He claims that he was blocked the whole time, but yet he had access to my website, my email, my address. He had people stalking me. There would be people sitting outside in cars outside of my house. But yet he never addressed me. And then when I got evicted, I just left 2 hours away to New York. I stayed in my parents' house for I traveled to Ohio for work and then went to my parents' house. And so he was like trying to look for me or find me through private detective services. And the only reason he found me in New York was because I was in a very public platform on social media that had over 1 million viewers. And I mentioned, yeah, I'm in New York, briefly, because my parents were all buying a new house and I'm waiting to move to the closing of the house to move into our new place with me and my son. And he's always stalked me. And this was kind of something he did to keep track of me instead of communicating with me. And that's how he found me. He ended up apparently using it against me. The fact that I left and was evicted, I left the state, but the case wasn't closed. And so they made it seem as though she's fleeing. And so we have the right to take her child because now she's running with the child. And if I'm running, then why am I telling on social media? I'm not an idiot. I'm not ignorant, and I'm very intelligent, and my business is public for a reason. And so this is his narrative. She was fleeing, hiding the child from me. But yeah, I've put on every record that you can find that I was evicted, and I showed proof. And so I just didn't have the awareness that the case was still open and that he was still pursuing custody. And so that's how he ended up kidnapping our child, not telling me anything about it, not, you know. And then what happened after transpired to now a today federal lawsuit that's pending.
So, do you have your child back, or are you
No.
still have custody of the child?
Currently, no. So I didn't. So for 11 months, he took him. He had him in his home in California, and I was in New York. He took him, and for 11 months, I traveled back and forth to California, trying to see him, going to the police, going with keep the peace police to his house. He would wave the paper saying, I have custody. I have all the right to deny the child to her. And they believed him. And he comes from a family of 2 parents who are retired police officers in LA County. So very much involved in the system. And he's also a Navy vet, although he was like, I believe, dishonorably discharged, but he comes from a place in which he thinks he has power because of the connections and the sororities or fraternities that they may be a part of, as you can imagine. And so he utilized his connects and these papers and the knowing of the system to make me look like I lost custody because I did something wrong. Okay.
So, I mean, because I'm sure there's just levels of how, like, for example, when somebody passes away, there's like stages of grief, can you share just what those stages were? Because it takes a certain type of person, number one, and a certain experience for you to even get to the point where you're at now, just even speaking about it.
Well, part of what I'm able to do and compartmentalize is that I've had to fight for my son. So in my culture, we don't believe in crying in front of people because it is a method of energy harvesting that we cannot allow people to have over us. And so I compartmentalize a lot of the emotions because it's a sense of protection of my spirit and of my autonomy. And this is why I'm very private about it. And I don't share a lot about it on social media because I'm not going to be crying in nobody's camera. I did it the night he was taken. And I saw how it almost fueled my child's father. Right. It almost fueled him in the sense that he felt like he won. And I know that because the day later when he kidnapped him with the 20 police enforcers that came to my house, and I was shocked. I had no idea what had happened. The only reason I was semi-calm is because I had a dream about something like this happening 2 days before. And so when it happened, I was so confused. I thought it was something else. I was like, I thought it was me. They wanted something to do with me. And so when they're taking my child, I'm like, somebody warned me about this. It was my ancestors. This is a dream I had. I do have a background in which I've been trained to, maneuver and manage my mind to not lose my mind. I have a background in martial arts, and I study the art of war. So there is methods in which you need to become logical and not emotional, and practical and not reactive. And so when it came to preserving the peace and the life of me and my child, I had to stay real grounded before I lost my shit. And so while all of this is happening, I'm holding my son who had just woken up, finished breastfeeding, because he was still breastfeeding. He's 2.5 years old. Just woken up because he went to sleep like at 8 p.m. I think 7:30, 8 p.m. They came in like at 8:40, 9 o'clock. I'm breastfeeding him, trying to figure out why they're here on the phone. Like, who are these people? What do they want from me? Having my parents at the door asking, because we're not just going to give you a right to come into our home and invade our property. And so when it happened, apparently the father was like down the block and they were just making a big scene. I mean, we're talking helicopters and everything. We're talking, they were 5 seconds away from looking like SWAT, but they weren't SWAT, but they looked like it. And
Wow.
this man utilized everything. He actually got the permission from the state of Delaware to get the state of New York family court to grant him a habeas corpus to collect the body of our child. Again, so and being given all this permission, again, fueled his narrative of there's something wrong with her. I have to go save my child. All of which I just got evicted and left to be with my parents before our house closed. And so just a lot of what still fuels me today is just like, it's a lot of rage, but it's controlled rage that has allowed me to still be focused, to communicate effectively. I have not told my story in its totality because I have been in the courts doing the work, and I don't want anybody to know my next move. And as we should, as we should when we're protecting our children and ourselves. In my fight has not really been with the system, and that's been the biggest betrayal for me. The system, in a sense, had not really wanted much to do with me because I'd been nothing they can have anything against. I had nothing I had never even gotten a speeding ticket in my life. So it's just funny how my fight has been solely against my child's father and his money and his influence, or so he believes, and his communication to the policy enforcers that, he may have in his corner, his family. He comes from a family of 19 brothers and sisters, all different mothers and fathers. I mean, all different mothers. So his father's a gigolo. And so some people are in the NBA, some people are in the service, some people are in police academies, some people are nurses. So this man thinks he has connects everywhere, in which he doesn't. And a lot of that is going to start showing now, but because the truth is coming out. But this is what happens when somebody tells a lie and needs to involve a whole lot of other lies and a whole lot of other people to continue their narrative. And so a lot of how I show up now is slowly learning how to tell my story with keeping my composure, keeping my autonomy, and also preserving the peace and the love that me and my son share together, because I'm not bitter. But this doesn't mean that I haven't fully grieved my daughter. That didn't allow me to grieve. Well, I started to grieve my daughter more when they took away my son. Well, they didn't really I don't want to say they took him away, because I have not lost my son. When my son went to meet who his real father is, being separated from a breastfeeding child, and just, I had not spent more than an hour away from my son. I don't believe in babysitters. I don't believe in my parents taking care of my children. My children are my responsibility. And so we co-slept, we cooked together, we ate together, everything. And I've had to learn how to just utilize the pain and turn it into power. So when you see a lot of my work today, in the last 2 years, I've published, when my daughter died, I published a prayer book because I didn't speak for 2 months after she died. So I needed to find words to empower myself, to speak life into myself again. I had to make the decision of I don't want my son to know me as this sad mom. I'm not like this. I'm very joyful. So I wrote a prayer book. When my son was taken, I wrote a book about breastfeeding because I was so pissed off and didn't want to get on social media and vent. I said, I'm going to put it on paper and profit off of this and empower women to not ever let somebody tell you that there's something wrong with you wanting to nourish and nurture your child up until its rightful age of 7 or 5 or 7 years old. And so, yeah, that's what you see now, just me knowing how to transmute my pissosity into power.
That takes a lot of intelligence, just maturity, just everything. And that's beautiful, because I think all of us, when we go through these, I don't like to say dark times, because I feel like it's just
Bringing light to the dark.
Mhm.
these, roads that we go through that sometimes are a little bumpier than others. And I know I've found myself falling into it and allowing it to consume me, allowing it to destroy me internally because I had no, I didn't know how to have self-control within that situation. And I would let it just break me down. And now, obviously, um, through growing, I've learned how to transmute those energies in a better way because I wasn't taught when I was young. I was just taught to react.
Mhm.
And I didn't know how to sit there and with it, and process it. And then afterwards make logical, like you said, decisions, not emotional decisions. And for you to be able to do that in that circumstance is extremely admirable because that's the type of emotional intelligence and strength you need in those situations, or they
Mhm.
literally tear you apart. And when it tears you apart emotionally, it tears apart your health. Everything is connected, you know? And I learned that even just by staying silent. When I was silent, when I was going through my postpartum depression with my first two, I developed a thyroid disorder. That didn't come because I just had a thyroid issue. I know why that came. That came
Mhm.
because I silenced myself. Because
Blocked chakra,
I
your throat
blocked.
chakra. Mhm.
Exactly. And why afterwards when I go into breath work and I go into these spiritual journeys and I start speaking about things and I start healing myself, it goes away. That's not that's it's not by accident. That was an intentional healing I did because I knew where it came from. I knew this wasn't just something I just a health issue I just had. It was deeper than that. Um, so can you tell us, I know you also have an herbal intuitions journal. Can you tell us about
Yes. So my herbal intuition journal was something I created when I took the year in California, which I just returned recently. In fighting for custody of my son, or not fighting, excuse me, claiming justice over my situation, I had to again tap back into civics, law. I had to really be more my masculine energy. And I fired the first attorney that I tried to hire. And then I realized I don't even believe in this. I'm a very intelligent, I'm a very intelligent woman in which everything happened for a reason. So because he took him to California, I ended up just going to California and then filing paperwork over there because of whatever instruction I was given at the time. And when I noticed that I paid somebody $4,000 to show up and they weren't even briefed on my case and couldn't speak on my behalf, I was like, never again. Nobody will do what I'm willing to do for my son.
it?
So I had to really tap into studying again, right? Because I was so in this bubble of nurturing my baby and just being connected to the land. And I'm talking when it was just me and him at home, we're like, I'm cooking every day, 3 times a day. My baby was 90th percentile every time we visited the MD. So his doctor. So he's a baby that's going to be over 6 feet. He ate a lot, breastfeeding and food. And I was always very much in the mother it at home house. What is it? Like a very domestic, I guess is what people call it. So I had to kind of switch gears. And so when I got back into studying, because I started studying law and uh, presenting myself in these courts, and I do have to highlight this because this is a very important part of my story, is that another reason why my son is not home with me right now is because when I showed up in California and started speaking up about what was happening to me and the father putting his hands on me, the judge was on my side. Then he put his hands on me when she made me go see our son in his house because she didn't understand why he was being kept from me. This man accused me of molesting our child because the baby wanted to breastfeed. And the baby would put his hand down my shirt, and he kept asking for boobies, and I'm not going to deny my son, even though we've been separated for 11 months. So the father's plan to kind of disrupt our breastfeeding journey because of his own childhood trauma, it didn't work. And so he accused me of basically trying to molest our child and forcing our child to breastfeed when I have videos of my son asking while I'm in his house, in the father's house, for the breast milk because he was trying to rebond.
They know exactly how to ask for it naturally.
Yeah.
It's so sick too when you really process. It's like this person has to be really sick, and the
Uh-huh.
obsession with you from this perspective alone,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the obsession with you is crazy. To
Mhm.
kind of, if you break it down, it's kind of like jealousy over the baby. Like what? It's really sick. Like you
It
said,
is.
it's
Yeah.
mental.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this was now me, quote unquote, staying in California in an Airbnb with basically just a carry-on bag because I didn't think I was going to be there. I was like, this is an open and shut case. This judge is going to see this. But because he realized that there was nothing against me, he accused me of that. And then that led to this whole, oh, well, then she needs visitations. Then you both need to pay for visitations. So I was paying $500 to $600 a week just to see my baby.
Wait, so
For
they took that excuse that he
Yes,
used as valid?
yes, all just hearsay, just because he said it.
Oh my goodness.
No proof, no proof. Then all of a sudden we're on visitations. And so I made them bring my son to me. So now my son was being transported by a stranger to the Airbnb where I was, and I'm trying to make this as normal as possible for my son. And so my son started to reacclimate to me, and that was bothering him. I'm not going to get into the details of what I witnessed of my son's behaviors, of what I witnessed, my son's clothing, or just knowing that my son wasn't bathed every day or, twice a day like he was used to with me. Or being fed the way he was used to with me. I mean, I've seen this over video camera for the last 11 months, but now seeing this in person was really painful to have to re-traumatize both me and my son saying goodbye to each other after a 3-hour, 5-hour session, 3-4 times a week. It was very, very, it was really hard. And this is not something I can explain, the suffering that we've both experienced and the toll that it took in our bodies. And we were getting sick a lot because of the stress. And listen, I've done the best that I could. I've not known or ever can imagine a mother that would do half the things that I've done with this level of composure. Trust me, I honor and praise myself. And so in fighting for
You got to. You better.
yeah. Well, because also, like, I want to remind you, I mentioned earlier, I was raised by a specific level of narcissistic mother. And this is somebody that I've witnessed being, borderline, like, like bipolar or personality, a little schizo. I call my mom Patricia sometimes because if you ever seen the movie Split. And so I've always seen my mom have this spirit of like, she's so friendly, but then one moment she's just like, nah. And it's just like, whoa, I saw that in my child's father. So when I noticed this mental and spiritual instability, I knew I had to move accordingly because now my son was in his care and this was dangerous for my son. So how I spoke, how I moved, if I share anything on social media, I'm afraid because what if he doesn't allow me to speak with him on the phone? And this is all the level of which I've had to move very strategically. So now I'm, writing all these documents myself, providing all kinds of proof, and then my anger and rage has to then be expressed creatively. So now I'm creating and connecting back with nature. I'm back in California because he's here, and California is a place in which I've always felt a little bit closer to home because of the climate, because of the palm trees. I'm from the islands, so here I am now connecting back with nature, and I had to find a solution to my low cortisol levels, my inability to sleep, because I had not slept without my baby for 2.5 years. Like I'd not slept this was insane to be separated from basically an organ of mine. So I was not even sleeping, and I had to connect back with herbs with not only their medicinal properties, but their spiritual properties. So it was a way to elevate my spiritual practices and also my health. And I said, anything that I create and I know works for me, I always want to share with others because I feel somebody could benefit from it. I don't believe anything that's given to me through my heart or my mind is just for me. Not everything. Some things are very sacred, but a lot of the things, as a natural born teacher, I'm supposed to share it, even the darkness, even the light, even the good, even the bad, because somebody can learn from it. So that's how the Herbal Intuition Journal came out. That's how I created the My Manifestation Journal, in which this journal, you just repeat an affirmation over and over and over and over again in the whole page, because I had to reprogram my brain even from thinking negatively, from speaking negatively, because I was dealing with this person. Even when I didn't see my son in person, I would see him via video camera, but then the father is right there. Present day, he still does this. He tries to interject in conversation. He tries to pick fights or arguments with me. He tries to kind of hijack the connection between me and my son. So there's been a constant evolution of me having to ground myself spiritually and through nature, because that's who I am, that's my identity. And right now, present day, again, there's a federal lawsuit pending in which I'm waiting to hear back from me holding all these institutions accountable, including my son's father, to return my son back to my estate because he is my property. And also, I have not seen my son since December of 2023. Because I had paid for visitations that were never granted to me, because the people that were doing the visitations, he was somehow communicating with them because he's the custodial parent. So there was some kind of sneaky behavior happening behind. Like, he would tell them how to, control the meeting, the visits with me and the baby, and not to let the baby go home, go to his home with different clothes or with food, even anything that I tried to create as a routine for my son, to kind of give my son a sense of normalcy of I'm with mommy and I'm going back to dad's house, like a toy that would make him feel comfortable, food, because he loves cooking with me. That's something we shared, nourishment. He would always argue against that. So all these little things that I tried to do included these supervised visitors or these monitors, and they were being coerced or manipulated behind the scenes. And they robbed me of money, didn't give me my last week and a half of sessions. And so that's when I created the federal lawsuit and got everybody involved. And I hadn't seen him since December. And our next court date, in which I created filed for an order to show cause. The father, it had been now 9 months since I'd seen the baby. The father seemingly didn't have anybody to babysit our child, because that's what our son has experienced, just babysitters after babysitters after babysitters. This child has not had any sense of normalcy or routine since he's been with him. And so that day he brought him to the courthouse and tried to make a scene. This was September 4th of this year. He tried to make a scene as if no, you can't talk to him because you're harmful. The security guard in this court, the people around are looking at him like, this baby wants to be with his mom. What? The security guard knows me because he had seen me go all this time. He's had seen my demeanor. He had communicated with me, and he's just like, what? You guys are grown. You're walking to the little playroom for the children. So you guys are safe here. If she's going to do anything crazy, everything's under surveillance. And so he tried to make a scene, but I still, willfully held my son's hand and escorted him also with the father to the little daycare that they had in the court. And that's the only time I was able to see him, all because of God. And the day after, I decided to leave California because I was just overpaying for an Airbnb, had barely any clothes, and was spending all this money on court documents and mailings, and just needed to kind of come home and regroup. So now I came back east and awaiting for the federal court to make the decision for me to go pick up my son.
Wow. Wow, 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 wow. You're amazing in so many ways. You really are. Because like I said, I'm sure a lot of other women who are experiencing similar stories that I've been hearing lately. Obviously, social media can be a gift and a curse, but if it's used properly, then we're able to, share these stories that nobody hears about and thinks that it doesn't even exist. They're real, and not every mother is going to handle it the way you've handled it. And really, really get into them books and start learning what the system is really about, because we live in a very, very sick system that the most natural things are considered a crime. And it's insane. The fact that even when like the fact that, when I decided to have home births, and even when I decided not to vaccinate, when I decided to breastfeed, I thought that would be embraced as something that, like, oh my God, she's like really tapping into her natural, motherhood and I was looked at like I was crazy. And the question of, well, you're still breastfeeding? Is it your titty? Like, why does it bother you so much? The fact that, everybody knows when anywhere I go, I just pop my titty. And I'm not saying I'm just saying I'm not sitting here worried about nobody. I'm worried about feeding my baby, and that's it. So I'm gonna go there, take my titty out, feed my baby, do whatever I gotta do. Obviously, I'm consciously aware that there are creeps and weird people, you know what I'm saying, in the out. But I'm also, I did it in the beginning with my son. Then I was like, why am I covering this baby? Like, do I want to be covered when I'm eating? No. Like, I started think, just common sense things. I was like, no, get this off. It's hot. Like, they're fine right here. I'm good. So just the fact that that's even come with resistance with people it's complete insanity to me when I look at this, because I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in this bubble, and like I'm quote unquote the crazy one. But I'm like, no, actually, y'all don't realize you guys have lost it. You guys have lost connection with self. You guys are so worried about this outside societal system that they built for us that you don't even know the paperwork you're signing. The pen is mightier than the sword. We realize that once you start learning civics, you're like, wait a minute. I've gotten bamboozled into a system that has wanted to enslave me in so many different ways and give me this illusion of freedom that we don't have. The fact that you never committed any crime at all and you are going through this is completely insane, that somebody else has the power to do that who was not even actively there throughout the entire experience. Somebody, like the baby was inside your body. People don't understand even the connection, like you said, when they separated you guys. All of this makes a difference. All of this makes a difference. This is why when like I said, I was before we got on, I gave birth in my 30s. My friends gave birth between 16 and 19 years old. And, one thing that I remember when I was ready to have my family, and I would ask them their experiences, I was like, what is going on here? When most of them either couldn't remember because they were completely, they said, drugged up, or they had a horrible experience where the baby was in distress and they had to have a C-section. And then obviously when I started to do my homework and I started working on this documentary that I've been working on, I started to realize this was all orchestrated. None of this is just happening. There's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with us. 90% of the times we are perfectly fine. It is the constant intervention, constant manipulation, constant fear mongering that they come to us in our most vulnerable state and then cause chaos. And I'm just so tired of seeing the same thing happening. And then people are like, even recently with the elections, like I was telling Denisha, I was so bothered when these people are saying they're fighting for abortion, and then they're saying that that's the reason why women are dying in childbirth. It's like, whoa, pause. Let's not combine the two, because that ain't got nothing to do with it. Because I've been, like I said, I've been doing this doc for 5 years. And in this doc, I go into when this started. And we're talking about 1930s is when we transitioned into these hospitals. When we transitioned and we gave up our power. That's when we started dying. Do not start saying that women are dying because of this abortion ban. That's a whole nother case. And even in that, there's some misinformation that's being spread on the rights that people have. But the truth of the matter is that people don't know how to govern themselves. They are so used to depending on a system to do everything for them. And then you know what happens? When all of a sudden they give you the power back, they don't even know what to do with it. They're losing their minds. They're just like, what do you mean? No, you need to tell me what to do. And it's like, no, now you have power. Now you have to be conscious of where you are living at. Is everybody in that village in the right in the state of mind that you are in? Because I'm not going to sit there like Abraham Hicks. She always says, find the path of least resistance. You think I'm going to go to a place where I'm going to have to be basically in a river trying to go upstream? For what? I don't need to do that. I'm going to find the path of least resistance. I'm going to go where I'm welcome. I'm going to go where the people are in the same state of mind, where people are in the same frequency. And these are choices that we have to make in our life. This is how you govern yourself. You have to control everything around you. So I just respect that you're on that frequency. You're showing something different. You know what I mean? And you're fighting back. You're fighting back a system that technically majority of the stuff, when you learn civics, 90% of the shit they do is not legal.
It's not. And I just read yesterday that blew my mind. Something that said all courts were dissolved in 2008. That's when they transferred from being courts into being corporations listed under Duns and Bradstreet. Yes. So the reality is that you know, and I don't even like, you know, no heat, no judgment. Love you, sis. But even like using those words of like, we're fighting a system, like I am not going to make it, you know what I mean? Like, and we need the reminder of checking ourselves because it's the way we've been indoctrinated to speak and like to continue to stay in that vortex and loop. So that's why I check myself. I'd be like, no, I'm not fighting because I'm not going to fight a battle when I've already won the war. Like my people would have already paid the price.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like, ain't nobody died in a cross for me, but they sure did, you know, was burned at the stakes for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, some of my people.
That's so important. I love that you said that because that also comes when you start learning is language and the words that we use. Because that's also something that I learned, that there's words that we use that we don't even know the real meaning to it, and we're using it and we're conjuring up the energy without being conscious of that. And that's something that I've wanted to always be like, I have to watch certain things I say. And I appreciate that. Yes.
And one of the biggest things and why I can sit here now, present day, and talk about this without losing my shit. Again, it's because I put in the work to make sure they know who the fuck I am. Number one, and who my son is. Because y'all not messing with me. Y'all messing with my lineage. But I specifically said after that first day when they took my son and I had no idea what was going on, which is why I went live on Instagram, which is why I went live on YouTube, because I had no idea what was happening. So I was out there speaking up, thinking, okay, well, let me make this make this, you know, public, because I just got my child kidnapped and I'm confused. And so after that, when I realized that wasn't getting me anywhere and it felt like people were mocking me versus supporting me, I said, I will not be a victim in this situation, and neither will my son. And when you know spirituality and you know everything is energy, and when you've sat with yourself and you've sat through life and death, nothing can break you. When you've honored yourself and become autonomous as a mother, knowing that your life is not just yours and your responsibility is to these children too, and not for you to give them everything, but for you to be mentally strong, aware, in tuned, and autonomous, you move differently. So I said to myself, I'm not finna be nobody's victim. I'm finna let y'all know who I am, because the problem is a lot of people victimize or become victims because they don't know that they're being put in a situation or being assumed to be a subject of some kind. And I'm nobody's subject. I am me. I am in flesh. I am alive. I am of the soil and of the breath and of the spirit. You can't tell me nothing. And what came out of me is the same. You know what I'm saying? So one of the things I would like to people also take away too is like you can't fight in a system that was created for you to fail. You need to first take yourself out of their jurisdiction. And as much as people are going to tell you to study civics and throw paperwork at courts and peoples and offices, just know that everything is done through the postmaster.
Yeah.
Through the postmaster, you let people know that you are of the estate and you are the executrix or the executor of your estate, which governs your body and the vessels that came out of you, i.e., your children, your babies. So that's another reason why I'm not nobody's victim. I know who I am, and I've been known who I am since I was a child. Now I just got some books and some more language to go with it. So now I speak your little English. Now I speak Hiwatahia Hekechi Taino reconstructed language. Now I speak Spanish, and I speak a little bit of your Black Laws Dictionary. So really,
A little legalese.
Right. That's right. That's right.
really,
No,
what mothers need to know is that you ain't fighting nobody but your own self. Know that when we lay down, we got to be prepared to protect the lineage, not just our bodies and our babies. We have to. Anybody we lay down with has to be on the same motherfucking page. And guess what? My mistake, not my children. My children were the greatest thing, and I'm so thankful for my child's father for my children. They're the most beautiful, powerful, forgiving part of what that man will never be, possibly, or what he has failed to be. But I am grateful for them because he and this experience has taught me how much us mothers need to take control over what we create in our mind and in our bodies and our actions.
Mhm. You know, I really want to point out too, for anybody out there, like understanding, like you said, the systems. There's no point of fighting systems that we're not even created to see us thrive or see us in an environment where we're gonna be fully in our purpose, right? So when we break down these systems, it's like you said, it's all jurisdictional. And if we understand that these systems come like with falsehood. You see, they're here to protect the children. They're here to save the babies. And look at what the system has done in a situation like this, where not only were you being a mother, you were thriving as a family together, despite anything that happened, that any situation that you have been put in, you guys still managed to thrive. So to know, like how you said, to sit down with the responsibility of a parent, of being responsible for this baby, and understanding the systems that you're pushing your children into them, because that's what we're doing. We're essentially taking them and throwing them to someone's jurisdiction because we don't have the will to be responsible and sovereign. So I love that you're bringing awareness to this and that you're bringing all this like information to the front, because being open also like to correction, like you're saying, like, yo, we got to change the way we speak. We got to change the way that we like that energy is circling around in our legacy. And if we can start taking that and uniting the proper energy, taking the proper words and putting that into our legacy instead of pushing this rhetoric that they have going on for us and having us fight the system and let's raise together. And it's like, there's no way we can do that. So it's so amazing to see not only that you've been connected to something, but that you have learned to make your child feel safe in this situation, to still feel the comfort in your soul and your spirit, and to still feel safe, like sane enough to be like, yo, my mom still got this. Like my mom is still calm. That means everything is still okay. If you were to freak out, your child's gonna lose their shit, even if you momentarily did, so it's amazing because we're not meant to be so strong and all these things, but this grounding that you're doing is so essential and powerful, because like you said, you're not even fighting a system right now. You're blocking a person that's trying to do, and then at the end of the day, it's not even a person. It's all things that's going on inside that we just
Yeah.
have to be aware and conscious about. And it's incredible what you're doing.
Yeah. And if I may mention this part of my son, okay? And this is where I'll probably get choked up because I love my son. And this is why I don't talk about him. He's like the best version of me because he's stronger in ways that I couldn't be when I was little. Because I knew that I was meant for something. I knew that I had something in me. I knew that I had to stand tall. And I saw it as having to defend myself from bullies, even in my own home and then in the world. And I don't mean like, because I was a cute girl. I was cute. I was smiley. I was, I got attention. But I still always had to defeat this negative energy of scarcity, of lack, of abandonment, of, and it showed up in different ways. And my parents working all the time, or my sisters being, dysfunctional, all of us. But in my son, I see this warrior in him. And I have to share the importance of being a mother who knows their children. And of course, I am now in a place in my life where I'm very close to one of my sisters, in which we do a lot of energy work together. We are the ones really carrying the gifts of my legacy of our ancestors and, providing it as service and gifts to the world. And I sat with her the year before I got pregnant. I had to sit with her while she was experiencing a releasing of the spirit. She was having a miscarriage. And so that was when we really had to tune into our spirituality, and so it doesn't mess with our mind, so that we don't lose the grounding. We had to find meaning in this death, in this darkness, in this transition. And when it happened with my daughter, they were there for me, my sister and my brother-in-law. And she's an energy guide. She's, trained in Reiki, shamanic healing. Well, shamanic healing practices come from our people, but she's also learned it in specific settings. And so we've gotten the tools to work through these experiences and always look at them from a perspective of, what is it teaching us? Why have we, called in this specific contract for us to fulfill it here in this life? And when I think about my son, every day that I speak to him, y'all, that I'm not with him in person, I have to walk him through and coach him through how to deal with a very abusive person next to him. And not the kind of abusive person that's punching him in front of, but the person that's passive aggressive, the person that mocks you when you're crying, the person that tells you you're going to be all right when you get hurt. As a 2-year-old, 2.5, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, he's 4 now. And so somebody who denies you food or water, like I've had to walk him through in conversation via a video call. And the more I've had to experience this and had my sister coach me through it, I mean, there's nights upon nights in which I would always have to even have my sister on the 3-way video call and have grandpa on the video call, just so my son, because he was mad at me, my son missing his mother, feels it's too hard to see mom. I'm okay speaking to Tia. So I'm just in the camera while Tia is maybe doing energy healing on him or praying over him and speaking life over him, because it hurts him to hear my voice. He'll just get agitated as, I'm over the phone, mom. Can I see you? Can I be with you? That energy. And I had to learn my son. So learning his life path number, as a life path number 4, my son being an Aries, knowing that his part of his destiny is to have a really, a hard childhood, because he's supposed to use that to serve community later on. And so for mothers who are hearing this, and one of the best gifts we could give our children is to understand their journey, know their journey and their purpose and personality, so that you can be well equipped in coaching them and guiding them through life. Whether it's praying with them, whether it's, I've had to teach my son different mechanism of energy healing, or like just breaking free from rage, because this is a 3-year-old who didn't even speak, consecutively the English language. He was learning 4 languages with me. And so when he went and stayed with his father, he went mute. he wasn't communicating much. And he was being bullied, saying by his father, being told that he's not speaking, he's delayed, ignorant people who don't know trilingual or type of behavior. And so important for us to just be so intentional about learning our children and never making even our children a victim of their circumstance or a victim of our perceived projected traumas and fears.
Yeah.
And with that's amazing. Please tell everybody where they can purchase your books at, if you have a website, your Instagram for anyone to connect with you. Yeah, share that.
Thank you so much for having me. I know it's been a long-winded story, but
amazing.
Yeah, it was
thank
amazing.
you. But so important for us to, recognize our stories and our purpose and why we experience what we do. I do provide services of spiritual counseling, and alongside with my products, my books, and my herbal tinctures. It could all be found on my website, ytheg.com. That's ytheg.com. And I'm on social media under all those platforms as well, YTheG or YTheGBay on TikTok. So if you Google me, you'll find me, my lawsuits, and some other fun stuff.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, sharing your story. I wish you all the best in this journey. I already know you're gonna do great, because of just the way you've took control of this situation. So because of that, and because of the power of your ancestors and everybody that is surrounding you, I see nothing but victory and great things happening. And you really are living in your purpose. And I'm grateful to have been able to experience that in this talk today.
Thank you. Thank you both for having me.
Any last words, Denisha, before we head out?
I'm honestly just grateful for the whole experience. I'm grateful to even know you because you've brought so much perspective change to me and like awareness of things that already you've influenced my life immensely already just by today's story. Beyond what we've done before, but like today I've had so many different perspective changes and I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Catch us next Monday on Mommy Mondays. Peace out.